Major changes typically don't occur overnight. This is certainly true of connectivity. While smartphone usage continues to grow, consumers are also expressing interest in a variety of other technologies, from voice assistants to IoT and 5G. Nowhere are these trends more prevalent than at the Consumer Electronics Show. And joining me today, live from the show floor at CES 2019, are Kevin Westcott, Telecom, Media and Entertainment Leader, and Mick Locker, Cognitive Advantage Leader from Deloitte. Kevin, Mick, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
The future of connectivity is definitely a broad topic that can be hard to digest quickly. So let's start with something that's a lot easier to relate to all of our listeners, and that's smartphones. What are we seeing at CES, and how does this tie into our Deloitte survey findings?
You know what we're really seeing, and you mentioned it in your introduction, is that there's continued growth in smartphones. Consumers are continuing to adopt new technologies. Now, we have seen the refresh rate slow down a little bit over the last couple of years, but this year we have some brand new technologies we're seeing coming in. Bendable phones. As we know, phones have gotten larger and larger, but we've now developed these ultra-thin screens that allow the consumers to actually fold the phones or bend them. The other thing that I'm most interested in is artificial intelligence in phones. It's giving us all kinds of new capabilities on the phone, including things that enhancing the photography, doing speech recognitions, becoming much better, and really advancing smart assistants to make them more and more usable.
And I think some of the other things we're seeing is things like the in-display fingerprint sensors. We've seen those on phones before, but I expect that that'll become more prevalent. And I'm also excited to see some of the new 5G devices that should be coming out later this year.
Fantastic. So bendable phones, I'm hearing then. For a while, phones got bigger and bigger, which meant designers had to think of bigger pockets in our clothes. Are we going to go back to smaller pockets now? Now we can bend phones.
Yeah, you can bend the phone and smaller, but you can, when you open it up, you still get the big screen. Pretty exciting.
Love it. I can't wait to see some of that.
Some of the prototypes we've seen actually allow you to wrap it around your wrist, or turn it into a wearable. So we're seeing the convergence, a little bit of wearables and the phone itself.
That's brilliant. I mean, truly becoming a multifunction device then, as we say. So a big thing that we saw last year and certainly continues to be prevalent is voice-assisted technology. And it's front and center again this year. But what can we expect on the future of voice usage?
So voice-assisted technology is really taking off. In a recent survey that we did, we saw that the adoption of voice-enabled speakers jumped from 12 to 20% in 1 year, which is a pretty big jump. And we also saw that people who have the speaker in their home, 69% use it weekly, 47% use it daily. So that's some pretty good usage. And we expect to see more of that voice-enabled technology get embedded in some of the in-home devices. So, for example, turning on your microwave or kitchen timer or air conditioning unit with a voice-enabled assistant. What I'm interested in seeing, and I have only been on the show floor a little bit, but I want to look for this more, is who's embedding the technology into their device versus who's integrating with the voice-enabled speaker. The other thing, and I know Kevin and I both talked about this yesterday at the Future of Mobility sessions, is the integration of the voice-enabled technology into the car, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, I see voice-enabled speakers as really the entree to get consumers comfortable with the technology. In addition to the stats that Mick quoted, the vast majority of usage still is for playing music. It's asking your speaker to come up and play either a track or a playlist. But we're starting to see them being more embedded into different devices where you can actually control the devices. And I think this is the entree point. And as we see more and more speech enabled embedded into devices, the people become more comfortable with it. I expect to see the second wave really around home security and home monitoring, where we can then control those devices through speech. And then I'm very excited about as this moves into the vehicle. And we've seen early versions of that. I would say that there's still some room to grow. And I do expect to see some more in the auto section when I get a chance to go there later today.
Brilliant. Let's go back to something that was said earlier, embed versus integrate. Which one do you think was going to be the winner going forward? If it's going to be an ecosystem play or whether it's going to be having that ability just to integrate everywhere? And that way it will be more capturing and useful as a voice assistant.
That's an interesting question. So, and we don't know how it's going to play out, right? But I think that, everyone is really hooked on their smartphone, right? And I actually see a future where the smartphone is the device that we all use to integrate with everything. So maybe we don't even need the speaker. We can just use our smartphone to do that. Maybe when we're in our home, we have the speaker device. But I see it's probably easier just to have one or two devices that you're interacting with versus a whole host of them.
I would very much agree. Based on our research last year, the smartphones become the most used device by a long shot, well above any other device. And because there's so many capabilities in the smartphones, consumers look at that as the single device. So the more that is in there, if you're outside of the home, I expect that to be the device. When you're in the home, it may be a fixed speaker. When you're in your vehicle, it'll probably be the vehicle. But I don't expect to see dozens. I do expect to see a handful of interaction devices for speech.
Got it. So depending on location, it could become your new hub.
Yes.
Talking about hubs and connectivity, let's talk 5G. It'd be remiss of me if we didn't mention those two, that letter and that number together in this podcast. But there's so many 5G deployments that are scheduled for this year, and we know that a lot of carriers have talked about it. We're seeing on the floor in terms of how it's all being integrated. What changes do you think it's going to bring to you and I as consumers as we see 5G rolled out?
Well, I think 5G is really exciting, and I'm really happy that we are finally going to start to see deployments this year, even though on a limited scale. 5G, as many people know, is going to enable higher bandwidth, lower latency, improved responsiveness, and allow us to connect many more devices simultaneously. So really exciting. And this is going to enable things like true IoT, connected cars, mobility, as well as enhanced mobile internet to enable new entertainment experiences and such.
I too am very excited to see it. Based on our research, consumer hype is also probably at its height because the average consumer knows that it's coming and they know that the bandwidth will be there. What will we see? Clearly we'll see enhanced entertainment being available, but today's bandwidth allows us to stream videos. So what I'm excited about is as this starts to roll out, what are the new innovations? We know that things around AR and VR are reliant on 5G to be able to deliver the bandwidth. There's a lot of talk about autonomous vehicles, but I expect the first phase to be just smarter vehicles, more things around accident avoidance, better guidance. Can you imagine not just looking at your map and seeing that there's an accident in 3 miles, but the car telling you, well, there's an accident in 3 miles, and here's the fastest route around it. Make 2 lefts and a right, and you'll miss it. So just smarter cars, and in the IoT space, I definitely expect to see an explosion of devices over the next year. With all of the connectivity that 5G will offer, we'll probably see an explosion of lots of devices, and we'll see which ones the consumers really adopt and which ones they see to be helpful. There was a great quote on our panel yesterday, which is, technology without a problem is just technology. We need to be able to enhance the consumer experience. So let's make sure that the devices that we're deploying on 5G are actually enhancing consumers' experience.
A couple of things you mentioned, and I'm hearing on the show floor as well. Bandwidth, we're all hearing about the speeds, but I keep hearing this word latency. For our listeners, can you help us understand why it is so important?
Lower latency means you get what you're looking for faster, right? So it basically enables more real-time, instantaneous communication between devices. Like in a car example, any little bit of latency is going to make a difference, right? In a sort of autonomous car situation, if there's any delay at all, it could cause an accident or something, right? Similarly, if you're in a medical environment, for example, you need to get the information delivered as quickly as possible with no latency. So, for example, if you're doing a surgery, off-site surgery or something like that, you need to get the information as quickly as possible.
Think of some very, I'd call pedestrian type of applications. I'm sure you've used video conferencing, and you find even in today's world where sometimes you step on top of each other because we have a small delay. When you get into some of the 5G technologies, you'll be able to have real-time video conferencing on your mobile phone because you'll be able to have all the bandwidth and the low latency. So you and I could be in New York and LA and be talking to each other as if we were both sitting in the same office.
Got it. Now I understand a lot more about the importance that they're talking about in those applications, particularly if, as you both mentioned around IoT as well, if you've got so many devices talking to each other, they need to somewhat keep up with each other, right? So they're not stepping over each other or missing each other. So talking about IoT and speaking about that, every year we're seeing more and more of these connected devices, and everyone on the floor is saying it can connect, it can talk, and connected cars, as you both mentioned, items in the home. What are the big things that you're excited about, or what you've already seen as to how this may play into the trends we're seeing in 2019?
Well, if I think about IoT and the ability to connect devices and sense things, some of the early IoT devices that were really successful were things around home monitoring and home security. Well, now I can think about having that type of convenience in all different parts of my life. I expect to see more sensors in different parts of our environment. I also mentioned earlier the smarter cars. And you happen to know I'm a car fanatic, so I'm very excited to spend more time in the automotive exhibit today. But if you think about the ability that, there are over 1 million people who die from car fatalities every year right now, and the vast majority of those are human error. If we can provide just better information to the driver, I'm not talking about autonomous cars, I'm talking about just providing better information, things like brake assist or lane departure warnings or lane departure prevention, those types of things, we could actually save a lot of lives. And just by having smarter cars that also are monitoring themselves, we'll have less maintenance issues and those types of things. So those are the kinds of sensors I think about when I think about how could IoT really advance my life. Having a phone that can actually tell me, hey, in 1,000 miles your car needs an oil change. Shall I schedule the appointment for you? Type of thing. Just making life easier. I look at many of these technology advances of how do I get back time? And how do I talked earlier about enhancing the consumer experience. Well, the one thing we all are limited on is time. So anything that gives back time to the consumer will probably do very well.
So continuing on the car example, one of the really interesting things we talked about yesterday was the sensors in the car around physical sensors, right? So that we'll be able to tell, like, if you're getting tired while you're driving, and then the car could actually infuse a scent into the car that adds energy, or change the music that's playing to give you more energy. Or if you're getting agitated because of what's happening around you, which many of us do on our daily commute, then you might get a lavender scent that infuses into the car to kind of calm you down. So that kind of stuff is really cool. And another one, and I remember seeing this last year, and I haven't been able to find it on the show floor yet this year, but I'm looking for it, is there's a company where they have a VR gaming headset, and the game is sensing your biometrics and adjusting the game based on your biometrics, so you don't get too agitated while you're playing the game. Wow. It's super cool. And again, I haven't found them yet.
Right.
I'm hunting them down on the show floor.
That sounds interesting. As a gamer myself, I'd love to see something like that. But also, just the sensors in the car, that sounds fantastic to, like I say, calm you down or get you focused, hint a coffee smell if that needs to wake you up, whatever it needs to be. That seems really interesting in terms of what IoT can certainly do and get those connected.
Well, we all know we've at one point had to turn on loud music to keep ourselves awake while driving, and now we're going to use sense, or at least the car can tell us that we're having an issue. The one thing about IoT that no matter what conversation you get into, you've got to recognize we're generating an immense amount of data.
Right.
And the combination of 5G and IoT is going to create that much more data. So there's a couple things that we're looking for out there, which is, it's just the management of the data, the understanding, the analytics of that data. But in today's world, there's no conversation we can have about data, and we don't have to talk about security and privacy.
Right.
And this is one of the things that even our research tells us that, our consumers definitely are concerned about the use of their data. They want more control over their data. So all of these IoT manufacturers and the folks who are building these fabulous devices to enhance our life also have to consider, the data that I generate through my car, through my mobile phone, through my home, that's my data, and that they may get to use it, but there has to be a value exchange. I've got to get something for their use. So give me a better experience, personalize my experience, give me something else back. But it's very, very important that that these IoT devices and their manufacturers understand that the consumers are concerned about the use of their data, and you don't go a day without seeing something in the press about the use of data.
Let's take that data a little step further. With all these IoT devices, different manufacturers, and to your point, your data is your data, you own it. If you're going to have a full-blown ecosystem where they're all talking together using your data that you may have shared with a device, but device B needs to be aware of it, how's that going to be policed? Who's going to manage that? Is it the ecosystem owner? Is it the manufacturer? How will that work in the real world such that you feel secure, that your data is being secured for what you want to share, but it's being shared much wider than you anticipated?
So there's lots of opinions on this out there about how to do this. There's one opinion that says the ecosystem owner needs to do this. So they need to orchestrate as the ecosystem owner amongst all of the devices and manufacturers and ensure that the policies are being are being enforced. There are actually others who believe that you don't need personal identifiable information to provide that. If I have enough data points about you as an individual, I can profile you without knowing your name, your birth date, your address, even your phone number possibly. So I'm actually pretty excited about that trend, because if I can get to slightly anonymized data, so not disclosing PII, but they can deliver truly personalized experiences, I think that would be a goal we all should shoot for. In the meantime, it's going to be around managing that information and possibly seeing certain new regulation coming from governments. We've seen that in Europe. We've seen it in California. We've heard rumors of other states considering that. What we don't want to get to is a fragmented situation with different regulation across multiple countries and multiple states in the United States, where you have to try to abide by all of those. So hopefully we can come to a solution that will satisfy the consumers and the regulators without getting to a highly regulated, diverse environment.
So it certainly sounds, Kevin, that the technology's there, the ability's there, the devices can talk to each other, but till we all feel the benefit of IoT in its full entirety, it will be based on policy, regulation, how it can all be put together, and not from a technology perspective.
I think it will be initially based on policies from the ecosystem owners. We've seen some regulation, but I wouldn't say we've seen widely adopted regulation, at least in the United States. It's a couple states have taken a look at this. I think if we can have the ecosystem owners start to figure out how to do this in without disclosing PII information, and consumers feel like they're in control. Our research tells us the consumers are actually willing to share data for a value in return, but they also want to control the data. They want the ability to see, edit, and delete themselves. And that's some of the key things that we have to make sure we're able to do. So if you have a year's worth of your home security information in the cloud, you should have the ability to go delete it and not have someone say you can't do that. And they may know every day that you enter and exit your house. That's personal information. You should be able to delete that. So we have to change the dynamic where everybody understands that the consumer's data is their data, and they have the ability to edit, modify, or delete it, but they're willing to share it as long as they get value out of it. And if we can get to that balance, I think we can avoid wide-ranging regulation that will restrict usage.
Let's stick on that data thread for a second, but I want to relate it to Mick, a panel you led yesterday, which talked about mobility, and I was really intrigued by one of the panelists talking about the personalization and the data for cars. And certainly when we look at cars at CES, it's about prototypes, it's about the future, and it's about unique cars and how they're all being connected. I mean, I even saw some flying taxis. There's so much out there. So I would love to get both your perspectives on how might we expect to see automakers, car vehicle manufacturers continuing to incorporate all these new technologies, IoT, etc., and still personalizing the experience in the car.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I think the company you're talking about it's a company that creates the AR, VR immersive experiences for the purchasing and configuration of the vehicle, which is pretty exciting. And you can basically, put on the VR headset, and then you can kind of see what it's like to be in the vehicle, right? What it's going to look like, how things are going to work, and you can make changes in that environment so you can see what the vehicle is going to look like in the end. And they don't use personal information, so they don't take your name and address and all that kind of stuff. But they, based on maybe the car that you have now or the way you're answering different questions, they'll personalize that experience for you. And their goal is to basically make the buying experience as exciting and interesting as the experience of owning a car. So I thought it was a pretty interesting concept that I think could be applied to a lot of other purchasing experiences, right? If you think about designing a kitchen, right, and selecting your appliances and things, you could apply it to that as well.
If I think about cars, and there's a lot of talk about autonomy and autonomous cars, I think level 3 and level 4 autonomous vehicles will take a while to truly be on the roads in lots of ways. But the early levels of autonomy are there today and happening. as a driver myself, I prefer to drive vehicles.
Right.
And so I'm looking for enhancement of that experience and safety as well. That's important. Can I have a car that will make sure that if somebody else makes a mistake on the road, they don't, I can avoid them.
Somebody else. I like that.
Right.
But how do we enhance the experience while you're in the car? Many people don't like driving and don't want to drive vehicles. I'm looking for.
I want to be driven.
I'm looking for things to kind of enhance that experience without being distracting and making that more interesting. I look at autonomous vehicles as something to be very interesting to commute in, but I'd still want to drive on weekends. So I think there's an interesting balance. You mentioned the air taxi, and to me that's an absolutely fascinating. It's a marvelous machine. It's a quad helicopter, and I look at that and think about my 50-mile commute in Los Angeles, and think about how nice would it be to just drive to even just the airport or a transit center, and be able to pop up and be up in Los Angeles in 20 minutes versus 2 hours. And you think about how that could change your commute habits, but also, as I mentioned earlier, give back time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's very exciting. We saw some interesting videos yesterday from some of the providers and the operators. While still a little while out, it's exciting to see what the future could look like.
Yeah, and like I said, I prefer to be driven,
Right.
whereas Kevin prefers to drive. But so I'm actually looking forward to a time when we do have truly autonomous vehicles, and I can get in the vehicle, and all of this great technology is just getting me where I need to go, and I can actually use my vehicle as a home office or a car office, if you will, and the vehicle is doing the driving for me. So that's what I'm looking for, and making the inside the car experience easy. Because another thing, I don't like looking for things like, how do I do this or that? Where's the dial for this, and
Right.
how do I adjust that? I just want it to be super easy.
That's interesting. So car manufacturers, listen out.
Right. Well, and the other thing we talked about yesterday was, what's going to be the interaction in the vehicle, right? Is it going to be voice? Is it going to be touch? Is it going to be, gestures?
Mm-hmm.
And, I think, a lot of the panelists kind of settled on some sort of combination, but I think it's pretty exciting to think about being able to get into your car and control it with your voice, tell your car where you want to go. We heard a panelist yesterday from a company called What 3 Words, and they've actually broken the globe into 3 meter by 3 meter grid.
Right.
And each square in the grid is assigned a 3-word label. So you can then use that 3-word label, apple, banana, pear, for example, and it'll take you to that specific 3-meter square on Earth, which is pretty cool. Because today, if someone's trying to get to my house in Connecticut, it tells them, to turn left on a corner where they actually shouldn't turn. And I'm always on the phone telling the driver, hey, come back to the main road, keep driving, you'll see my mailbox, right? But if we just take that a little bit further, that voice control would enable, and this came up on the panel yesterday, it could enable blind people who today are not mobile themselves, right? They could actually have a car experience. They could get themselves somewhere. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's a huge impact at a social level.
There was a lot of discussion yesterday about the underserved, whether it be folks who have impairments or people who currently don't have access to transit. I was actually very encouraged around the amount of social impact discussion we had yesterday. It's not just about the technology, it's about how do we change people's lives. The other thing about the vehicle conversation that I would really like to see, we all know that we have a key or a key fob that when we get in the car, it kind of knows who we are and it puts the seat where we want. But think about the truly personalized experience where you get in the vehicle and maybe it's your smartphone that identifies you to the vehicle. So it's not only putting your seat in the place and maybe tuning the radio to where you want it, but it's also looking at your next appointment and immediately doing the routing to get you to your next appointment. We also had some conversations around audio technologies. And for any of us with children, when you put 2 kids in the back seat with their iPads and they're watching things, it can get kind of noisy. Can you really imagine a world where I can put my children in the back seat with their tablets and they have isolated audio and they get to enjoy their immersive experience, and I can actually have a dialogue with my spouse up front and not be interrupted every 3 minutes? So those are some of the technologies I'm really excited about.
That sounds like bliss for a lot of people, let's put it that way. So lastly, looking at all these technology advancements that we've seen, and particularly talked at length here about autonomy, AR, VR, cloud, how are they all going to come together to really enable that experience? Because a lot of what we've talked about here, what I heard on a lot of panels and on the floor, everyone's talking about that, elevating that experience. So how's that all going to come together? And I know you've given some examples on that as well.
Well, everything you just described is happening today at some level, right? We have autonomy. We have certain levels of autonomy. We have AR, VR. We have the cloud. But the real technologies that's going to change all of this, in my mind, is 5G. The connectivity that we're going to have, the ubiquitous connectivity, the incredibly high speeds, the minimal latency is going to change and give us a platform now that we can start to innovate on. If I asked you 20 years ago, what do you want from the internet? Or actually, better yet, what do you want from an app on your smartphone? Well, 20 years ago, there were no apps and there were no smartphones. So I look at this saying 5G is going to be a boom for the entrepreneurs to go create things we're just starting to imagine what it could be, because we don't know what you could do. Again, 20 years ago, if I asked you about the smartphone apps, you would have no idea that you could have maps and calendars and games and all of these things. I don't know if we've even started to scratch the surface of all the things we can have with 5G, but we know that things around autonomy will advance. We know that AR and VR is becoming mobile. We're no longer being tethered to a computer. We're going to have small boxes or small compute devices and glasses we can use. We know that the putting more and more data in the cloud gives us more personalized experiences. We know that AI at the edge is getting smarter, so it's faster. So whether it's in your smartphone or it's somewhere very close to you, it can make faster decisions for you. So all of those things are going to be enabled by 5G.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I'd add to that is I think that what we'll also see is a more seamless experience between, where we are when we're at home, work, in the car. I think the technologies that are coming up are going to enable us to have a seamless experience across all those different locations. So, we don't know exactly where it's going to go, but it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And certainly some of the things you've covered that I've found out is just around the fact that it's going to be more sense around our emotions. So it's not just the convenience, giving back the time, but it's really going to be plugging into how we're feeling in that moment and maybe help us change if we need to change in that moment, which seems incredibly exciting.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that we'll be able to be more natural as we interact with different devices, right? That's kind of the direction that we're moving with voice interfaces and the gesture control. So everywhere we are with this seamless experience enabled by these different technologies, we'll be able to just sort of act in a human way and things will work for us.
Absolutely. So this future connectivity is certainly bright.
It really is.
Brilliant. So with that, Kevin, Mick, thank you for joining me again on the show. Always a pleasure to have you on, and look forward to having you back on in short order.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Connectivity is an area that continues to evolve, and we're seeing many of those changes on the floor at CES this year. As Kevin mentioned, technology without a problem is just technology. And with the ability of companies to implement change and the benefit becoming clear to consumers, we should only expect to see more growth. What's next in the future of connectivity? As we heard today, it's enhancing the experience for consumers, removing human error to make our lives safer, more efficient, convenient, and ultimately innovating in ways that will take connectivity to the next level. I want to thank my guests today, Kevin and Mick. Thank you for joining the show. I'm Hanish Patel, and until next time, happy listening.